Happy New Year! If you are new here, welcome. I'm Lori. Making Days is an emerging community that's all about the intentional pursuit of peace, beauty, and all the good stuff, even when, especially when, life hasn't gone as planned. Cranberry lime polar seltzer water. It's pretty good. I don't really like setting New Year's resolutions for myself because personally, I've always found that January 1st is a premature date for meaningful action. I'm just simply not ready to jump on January 1. I do feel the shift, the opportunity, the desire to step into new routines and new rhythms, the desire to change and have a fresh start. I love that about the new year, but I need a little transition period. And that's where things can get a little bit messy. And this episode is probably going to feel a little bit messy because there's transitions happening all over the place as I'm muddling my way through this pivotal moment in the story. Did you know that January is named after the Roman god Janus? He has two faces, one here and one here, so he can look behind and forward. He was the god of the new year and of transitions. And of doorways, which kind of makes sense. Have you ever tried standing in a doorway? It's a little disconcerting. You're like, should I go out? Should I go in? What am I doing here in this doorway, you know? There's something to that. Now, I don't recommend putting your trust in Janus to steer you clearly through life's transitions. I've put my trust in Jesus to steer me through all of my life's transitions, but nonetheless, I thought that was an interesting tidbit to share with you. Transitions are murky water, a place where the steps aren't sure, a place where we feel indecisive, fearful. Most of us need to be highly motivated or totally out of options to venture into the murky, snake-infested waters of transition. There's a risk in transition, a risk that something will be lost, that you won't make it to the other side, that you'll end up back where you started at best, or maybe even worse off than before. So here's my messy, murky transition into what this video is actually supposed to be about, which is the season of transition that we entered into when we left California and moved to North Carolina after almost losing Clara. I consider myself to be a little bit of a self-proclaimed expert on transitions and reframing and new rhythms and new routines simply because I've had to make so very, very many transitions and changes in my lifetime. As my daughter's health declined, as we had to pack up our family and move yet again and yet again, each time that happened, there was transition, there was disorder, there was chaos. And yet it had to happen. We had to go through that. And so I became very good at getting rid of all of the excess, at slashing anything that wasn't essential and focusing on what I needed to do and where I needed to guide my family and how I needed to show up for my family in that time. Each time we had to make these shifts in our expectations or rhythms or routines, we kind of drew the boundaries in closer and closer. The capacity of what we were willing to and able to manage became smaller and smaller and smaller. By the end of our 14 months in California, we had hemmed every boundary in so close that our capacity extended no further than our arms around each other. And sometimes that seemed too far. But in this very, very limited space, I discovered that there was a capacity for love that was vast. There were no more wide places or paths I could tread upon and dream about what my life or my daughter's life or our family's livelihood as a whole could be or would be or should have been. There was no space for could be, would be, should be thoughts. There was only survival. There was only one option: be. There was only one time: now. And even though we were not and could not be and would not be so many of the things that we had hoped to be and wanted to be, we were still so loved. This love wasn't dependent on should be, could be, would be. This love was still there with us when we could only be. When we left Texas for California, this final move was always the end game, but we would have never guessed the trauma and suffering that would take place during those 2 long years. Here we are, August 2020, driving across the country in a minivan with a daughter that only 8 weeks ago couldn't have made the journey and lived. We had actually been considering medical transport from California to North Carolina, but Clara improved enough in those last 2 months that we decided it was safe enough to make the journey ourselves. There was a lot of preparation leading up to this move, and we weren't moving alone. My mom and dad sold their home in Colorado and decided to move to North Carolina with us to help support us with all the care and the unfolding situation that was happening with Clara and Anna. Mom and Dad had always said, when you figure out where you're going to land, we'll move there with you. It's kind of random how we ended up in North Carolina because none of us actually have any connections here. And the entire Western United States was out, unfortunately. And I think we kind of all consider ourselves Westerners. We've all spent a lot of time there. Erin's from California. But the thing about the West is it's either too high altitude, it's too remote, it's not close enough to a big, good, hospital, medical system, and my girls needed something like that. Or it's California. And so with the entire Western United States being off our list for our particular situation, we had to look eastwards. I actually grew up in Ohio, and Cincinnati Children's is one of the top in the entire nation. And we still have, long, deep roots and connections in that area. And so we kind of played around with a few ideas, but Cincinnati seemed like a no-brainer. My mom and dad actually went on a trip out there and scouted out houses and properties in the situation there. And they came back from that trip a little discouraged, not quite having found what they were looking for. The area's grown so much and was just so different from when we lived there during my childhood. And at the same time, I just kept thinking about those cold, long Midwestern winters, and something in my heart was just like, oh, I don't know about this place. And I remember just looking at a map of the United States and just kind of going through each state. And so I kept looking further and further south. And for some reason, I was unnecessarily concerned about gators. So in North Carolina, like central North Carolina and mountainous North Carolina, there's not really any gator danger. Of course, if you get out more towards the coast and southern North Carolina and then South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, it's like Gator City. And I don't know why gators are such an issue. Now I don't think they would be. One time when I thought that we might want to move to Costa Rica, this was before the girls got sick, I remember researching all the snakes in Costa Rica and whatnot. And fun fact for you, Costa Rica actually has the most snakes per capita of any nation on the planet. At least that was the statistic probably 7 years ago. So there's a lot of snakes in Costa Rica, and there's a lot of gators in the southern United States. But there isn't any real threat of dangers for me where I live. North Carolina also had a state Medicaid waiver because that was part of the criteria we were looking for also. Being in these various states, most of them do have some sort of state waiver, but the wait lists can be excessively long and just really hard. And so you never really know. I mean, you can't get a lot of straight answers, and government websites and talking to people on the phone here and there. I mean, you gather as much information as you can, but you're still kind of like, I wonder if this is going to work whenever you're dealing with all these bureaucratic things. And so it appeared that the program in North Carolina would be more likely to work out than maybe some others. And we also knew, we said, well, we're going to be really limited. Like, we aren't going to be able to fly. We aren't going to be able to travel. We aren't going to be able to really go anywhere unless it's a drive that's like in the 2, 3, maybe 4 hours away. And so North Carolina gave us some options because it's 4 hours from the mountains and 4 hours from the beach, and it's warm. And so I kind of came up in my mind, yes, it's North Carolina, this is it. And I was hoping everyone would agree. And so after my mom and dad's trip to Ohio, I was kind of like, well, what about North Carolina? And all of a sudden, everyone kind of perked up a little bit. They said, oh, we thought about moving to North Carolina years ago, but we moved to Colorado instead. And everyone kind of liked the idea. And so that ball was set rolling, and there was lots of searching for houses online and making lists, because obviously if my parents are leaving Colorado to move to be close and be of assistance to us, they really need to be close. So I think the maximum driving distance we would allow of the houses to be apart was 10 minutes, but closer the better. And so my dad, the organization expert, made all these like charts and graphs, and then we all had to like look at the screen together and say, well, this one, and this one are in a cluster. There was clusters of houses that we consider. And then of course, Clara was still so sick. Aaron and I could not both leave her. And so I left, and it was in July, because I remember I missed Isaac's birthday, the only birthday I've never not been with him, and flew out here to North Carolina and met mom and dad. And I think we were here 4 nights or 5 nights, but it was about 5 days we had to find 2 houses and buy them. That is what we did. And lo and behold, mom and dad found these 2 houses. Ours is here. Theirs is actually on the cul-de-sac right there. And so they're literally no time at all. You just walk right on over whenever you want to. And that was a really good situation. Mom and dad put the offers in on the houses and got them. And so then I returned to California, and it was just 1 more month there until we would leave to come out here. Clara had improved quite a lot. She was still in a very delicate, weakened state from all of that. She still wasn't walking, wasn't talking. She was still having these crazy shaking events, but not as much as before. She was resting more. She was starting to put on a little bit of weight. You might think, well, like, why move when she's in this condition? Why move when she's like that? And we were just at the end of our ropes where we were. And we just needed a place to be us. We're so grateful for the time that my mother and father-in-law let us stay in their home and take over. But we needed a place where we could just kind of make peace and move forwards into what our new normal would be. Also heavy on my heart during that time is we didn't know how much time Clara had left. I mean, we really had no clue at all. It could have been any time, really. And so some part of me was like, I want to be in a home, the 5 of us together in this new place, so that if Clara passes, Anna and Isaac have memories of her in this place, so that Aaron and I have memories of her in this place. Like, the worst possible thing I could imagine was her dying in California, because we weren't staying in California. Like, there's no way that was happening. And if she had died there, and then we had had to move so far away, like, to me, it would just seem very, and I wasn't in the place then that I am now. And just the thought of that would seem like so much just like trauma and lack of closure, and just this like severing apart of something that wasn't yet ready to be pulled apart. And so I was like, even if she only lives for a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year here, at least like her memory and her footprint and her presence will be a part of the memories that we have in this place that we're going to have to live in and go forward from. Anna passing first. Wow, what a wild turn of events that none of us would ever have thought. But at that time too, Anna was doing pretty well all throughout the time we were in California, and Anna did really well her first like year and a half here, and then she really had a very sharp decline her second year of life here in North Carolina. But I also was thinking, that if Anna is following the same patterns as Clara, we were expecting her eyesight to go, sometime in the next couple of years. And I kept thinking, like, I want Anna to know what her home looks like. Already bringing Clara here, her vision had already deteriorated. She never physically knew what her home looked like. She could feel it. She could feel that it was home. She could feel that it was, families have their own unique, like spiritual thumbprint on their homes and their places. And so I know that that was familiar to her, because that is something we take with us wherever we go. It doesn't matter where we are. But she never physically saw it. And that always kind of tears me up a little bit. She never saw her home or her pretty room. But Anna did. And so I was like, I want this kid to be able to live in this house long enough that she's like, oh yeah, I remember that this room has these pretty teal blue walls. I remember, that my room had a tree mural on the wall. I remember that, you walk through this room to get to this room, and there's a window here and a door here, but just this memory of a place, so that if her eyesight went, she still had that visual memory of, this is what my home looks like. And so those were two of the big things on my heart that I'm like, we just have to get here. And we did. The drive across the country was relatively uneventful, which was good. It was grueling. It was hard. We knew our days were limited. I think we did it in 4 days, and the kids were all great. Clara did great. And we made it here. Mom and Dad had moved in 5 days before us, I think. So they had their stuff in. We had, I think we had a moving truck that hadn't arrived yet. And we had a few boxes that they had brought, and they had put their patio furniture in our house. So we had that, and we had mattresses. We had the basics already here that they had set up for us. And I remember just pulling up to the driveway and walking in the door for the first time and feeling okay, this is a place where our capacity can begin to expand a little bit more again. Like I shared with you, I just had to cut out everything except for what was essential. It was all so grueling and difficult. I think we had got down to the point where our capacity was so minuscule, or the resources we had, even though we had them, they were so taken, overextended, every ounce of everything was in use. It was needed. It was being expended. There was nothing extra. There was no margin. So we were at a place where we couldn't get any smaller. The only option left was to disappear or to expand. And so I'm just so grateful. If you've watched any of my other videos, you've probably heard me say that we have been in the best case scenario of worst case circumstances. And it's just so true. I mean, we kind of financially decimated ourselves chasing answers and therapies for Clara. And we had always been very financially responsible people. I mean, Aaron's a school teacher, and I've never had any career to speak of. I always knew that I wanted to stay home with the kids, and that's what we did. And somehow we made it work. But when all of this started happening, I mean, any savings we did have, what we made from selling our house, which was a pretty good chunk, we just blew it. I guess not blew it, but it went the way of the wind, chasing answers for Clara, and sustaining the lifestyle of moving that many times and being on the road and not really being set up and not being in that place where you have the extra margin and capacity to like do all the extra little things that are frugal and save you money. Like that stuff takes time. And I used to do that stuff. I used to go to several different grocery stores or look at the sale ads. But when you're in such a deficit of like resources and you have, it's very easy just to take the convenient route, which maybe wasn't the best option because now I have debt that we need to pay off. But it is what happened, and here I am, and everything's fine, and it'll be fine, and I'm not going to worry about it. That's not where I was trying to go with this. Oh yeah. Anyways, I was saying, and I'm grateful for this place that the Lord provided for us through the generosity of my parents. And there's also the side that you're like, you don't want to be in the place where you have to receive generosity from others. And during this whole thing, we've been in that place a lot. And we've learned to accept generosity. And I hope someday we're in a place where we can be more generous. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes I think, oh, I'm sitting around in this big fancy house talking about my financial ruin, and there's a disconnect there. And I like to be pretty honest. So it's not my house, but you know what? I can live here and I can appreciate it. And it is beautiful. And everything in this world is temporary anyways. So I have what I need. I have more than I need. I have beauty, which my soul needs that. I crave beautiful places. Like even if I lived in a cardboard box, I would have to like make sure like there were like windows cut out at the right angles and the light came in a certain way. And just wherever I am, I can't help but to try to like make beauty and proportion where I am. But it wasn't too hard with this place. So even though living in a big fancy house wasn't my personal dream, and it's not a bad dream, it's a good dream. I know that actually is a lot of people's dream. Our dream was to travel the world with our children, to move around to different international schools and introduce them to different cultures. My dream has always been to be relatively unencumbered and on my feet and out in the world, just interacting with people and God and life. But sometimes God provides for us good gifts that aren't the things that we would have chosen for ourselves, but that end up being what we need. We needed the quiet. We needed the constant support of our family. We needed a place to just be and grow into our new normal. After all that trauma with Clara, and she still hadn't fully recovered from that when we moved here, we still wondered, maybe she'll talk again. Maybe she'll walk again. We didn't know. The amount of hands-on caregiving that she required each day was, more than it had previously been before all the trauma. We needed this place to kind of regroup and accept and come to grips with and move forward with our new normal. So the Lord saw fit to expand our boundaries in this place. And though the boundaries aren't large, they're not borders and nations, but they're from that wall to that wall, and that wall to the wall behind me, upstairs and downstairs, and across the cul-de-sac. They're on the road I take to Costco, and the road I take to the grocery store, and on the road I take to church and my son's school. And compared to the far-flung places I used to go, the types of adventures I used to go on, these boundaries seem so tiny to me, so limiting and self-contained. But they've been so good. They've been so life-giving. So I love the Gilmore Girls. If you love the Gilmore Girls, write Gilmore Girls in the comments below. But there's this one episode. Actually, it's not in the regular Gilmore Girls series. It's in that Year in the Life series that Netflix did, like way after the regular series ended. And I wasn't really a fan of that, but there's this one scene where Rory comes back into town and she's accepted a job writing for the local newspaper. And her world had expanded so much, and she'd had these fancy jobs and this exciting life, writing for bigger newspapers and whatnot. But I don't even remember what happened, but somehow all of that had kind of ended, and she's found herself jobless and back in Stars Hollow at the little local newspaper. And she was feeling really deflated and like, this is not what the plan was. And she was sitting there, she was talking to Jess, and she said, I used to be a contender. And just kind of whining, I used to be a contender, kind of bemoaning her present situation she found herself in. And he was like, you're still a contender, but whatever. But I've just thought of that over the years, that scene. It's in my mind. The gift it's been to not be a contender. Because there were a time in our lives before the girls were sick where you feel like you're in the race. You feel like you're a contender. You feel like you're, competing or keeping up with the Joneses, or at least exploring your own path and dreams. And you're on some sort of like forward momentum in the way you desire. And then when we have life circumstances that are beyond our control that thwart that path and that stop it in the tracks, or that just like absolutely knock you out of any ability to contend, which is what happened to us, there's actually a great freedom and peace in that, where you're like, I don't have to strive or contend. Like, even in this space where what my life isn't adding up to what I had hoped or thought it would be, doesn't mean that it's devoid of worth or meaning or richness or goodness, and doesn't mean that there won't be some other path from that place later. There's a certain freedom there to engage with God and with others in a slower way, in a more humble way, in a needier way, in a more authentic way than you've maybe ever communicated with others or God before, because all of a sudden you're not a contender. You are divergent, you're different. Your circumstances have pulled you out of the stream, out of the rat race, and you're over here. And for a while you might gaze and think, oh wow, wouldn't that be nice? I wish I could do this or that. Like all these other people are, like all my friends on Facebook are going here, there, and the other where. And I've been to 5 doctor's appointments this week. But there's also just a beautiful freedom and richness. And I think an insight and wisdom that comes from inhabiting the places of the lowly. Jesus himself inhabited the places of the lowly. So there's something in that, That's my rambly, murky transition to getting back into finishing the girls' story for you. It's actually a really intense, rich time this past month and coming up that you're probably not aware of. But of course, this Christmas was our first Christmas without both girls. So it was our first Christmas, it being just 3 of us. Last Christmas, Clara was still with us. And the Christmas before that, it was all 5 of us. So this was our first Christmas without the girls, but it was also their first Christmas together in heaven. I actually don't really think they celebrate Christmas in heaven because, we kind of made that whole thing up. I mean, celebrating Jesus' birth, that's awesome. We can do that 365 days a year. But anyways, that's besides the point. But anyways, so February will be the 2-year anniversary of Anna's heavenly birthday and the 1-year anniversary of Clara's heavenly birthday, both within the same week. And so I'm feeling not actually a heaviness about this, but I'm feeling more of a lightness about this, as if I'm approaching, the end of a race. I think in some ways Anna's death took me longer to process because it was sudden and unexpected. Whereas with Clara, it was expected and it took a long time. And so we were able to do a lot of our grieving preemptively. I forget what that's called, but I know there's like a real counselor term for that. My sister-in-law told it to me once. But basically, we grieved a lot of things before. So when the time for the death came, there was still and there has still been real grief and grieving her sweet little presence. And there always will be what I call those just storms of grief that pass through. But I feel like, it's a good time at their 1 and 2 year anniversaries. I do feel like this sense of release and moving on. Like last year on Anna's 1 year, like I didn't really want to celebrate it because I wasn't really ready to be like, yes, let's celebrate this. But I don't know. And I'm not a big celebration person anyways, but this year I already have an idea and something's come to me, like a way to kind of celebrate the both of them in that same week together. And I like that idea, and I think it's a good step forward. And also I am getting close to finishing up this story. Most of the drama has really already happened, and the rest of the story has really rich parts about us being here. I want to touch on some practical things about, what it was like to have nurses in our home. And I might even be able to interview 1 or 2 of Clara's nurses for that, which would be fun. And of course, I do want to move into the places where I share with you, I guess, the thoughts and processes I had after Anna's death. Yeah, but there's still a few things, but basically it kind of serendipitously worked out that what I have planned to share with you will nicely coincide with their 1 and 2 year anniversaries that are coming up at the end of February. And I'm excited about that. And so this is just a big month of transition. So while continuing on and finishing their stories well, I'm also really excited to move into something new, into a space